They noticed her the moment she stepped forward, an elderly woman, unassuming, nearly invisible in the blur of the crowd. Nothing about her screamed urgency, just another face in a long line of travelers. But when security told her to open her bag, something subtle shifted in her gaze. It wasn't panic, it wasn't defiance. It was deeper, like an old wound reopening without warning. The officers chuckled quietly, thinking this was just another routine check. They had no idea they were seconds away from a moment they'd never forget. Before we continue, where in the world are you watching from? If you believe in quiet strength and stories that shine a light on dignity in unexpected places, subscribe to support more content like this. The security line coiled through the atrium like a restless snake. Rain hammered the tall glass windows of the government building, shadows crawling across the polished floor. The tension in the air was heavy, almost tangible. She stood perfectly still, straight-backed, 68 years old, and composed. Her silver-streaked hair was gathered neatly in a bun, her outfit simple yet spotless. Unlike others, slouched in boredom or glued to their phones, she faced forward with a kind of quiet purpose, hands folded, waiting her turn. The checkpoint buzzed constantly. Metal detectors, irritated voices, orders barked over noise. Officer Rustin, mid-30s, his too-tight uniform clinging to his frame, scanned the line with a well-practiced skepticism. His eyes settled on her for a moment too long before motioning sharply. "ID," he said, palm extended. She handed over her card. It was aged, edges worn, lamination peeling. He flipped it, frowned. "This is expired." "The letter said it would still be valid," she answered, calm and measured. She reached into her bag, producing a folded government document, complete with seal. He barely glanced at it. "What? Is your business here today?" "I have an appointment." "An appointment for what?" he pushed, just loud enough to draw the attention of others. She paused. "It's personal." That answer didn't sit well with him. As others, youthful, loud, trendy, breezed through, Officer Rustin zeroed in on her. He waved over another officer, a broader man with a gruff presence and a nameplate that read, Loretz. "Officer Loretz, assist with secondary screening?" Loretz gave her a look that said more than words ever could. "Step to the side, ma'am." She did so without hesitation, her stance straightening, shoulders back. When she answered with a crisp, "Yes, sir," Rustin's brows lifted in surprise. "That bag," he said, pointing to a worn duffel beside her suitcase. "Open it." She met his gaze. "May I request a private screening?" she asked quietly. The officers exchanged glances. "No. Open it here." Raindrops clung to her coat as she stood before them, poised but visibly weary. The harsh overhead lights sliced shadows across her face. Onlookers began to slow, watching. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "That depends on what's in the bag," Rustin replied. A group of office workers paused mid-coffee. One woman frowned, visibly uncomfortable with what she was witnessing, but said nothing. The rain beat harder against the glass. The woman placed her duffel on the table, unzipping it halfway. "I'd still prefer privacy," she repeated. "And I'd prefer cooperation," Rustin shot back, his voice edged with irritation. "We can do this here, or in a room where things get a lot more intrusive. Your choice." For a moment, something passed across her face. Not fear, something else. A mental weighing of options. A familiar crossroads. "Very well," she said softly. Rustin pulled on latex gloves with performative flair. The loud snap of rubber cut through the murmuring checkpoint, drawing more curious stares. "Since you want to make this difficult, we'll do it the hard way." Phones appeared. The crowd grew. Still, she showed no emotion. But her eyes, those told another story. They held history, regret, and the weary acceptance of someone who had faced this kind of scrutiny before. "So?" Rustin asked, leaning in. "What's so important in this bag that you need privacy?" Loretz didn't wait for permission. He unzipped the main compartment of the duffel, and together they began pulling out her belongings, item by item, lining them up on the cold stainless steel table as if they were cataloguing evidence. First came a bottle of prescription pills, then a carefully wrapped picture frame, left unopened. Next, a worn copy of Tennyson's poems, its pages curled at the edges from years of use. Each item was handled with a little less care, a little more indifference. "This feels wrong," a young man whispered to his co-worker nearby. His friend nodded, still glued to the unfolding scene. The humiliation was quiet, but unmistakable. Rustin held up a strange-looking key, ornate, aged, unlike anything you'd see today. "What's this?" he asked. "It opened something that should have stayed closed," Isolde answered softly, eyes distant, voice firm. The officers chuckled. "Ooh, very cryptic," Rustin sneered. "You a fan of spy movies, ma'am?" They dug deeper, revealing more, things that should have remained private. A handwritten letter, a medical report, the diagnosis clearly visible beneath the harsh lighting. Personal, intimate parts of a life laid bare before a growing crowd. Dressenville Operation 1976, Loretz read clumsily off a notebook, stumbling over the word. "What is that? Your knitting circle?" Isolde said nothing. She stared ahead, her composure unbroken. She looked like someone who had endured worse than public ridicule. "These old folks always think they're more important than they really are," Rustin said, loud enough to be heard by everyone watching. Her silence only made him more irritated. He plunged a hand back into the duffel and pulled out a small box. Without hesitation, he flipped it open. Inside, a simple metal pin, no inscription, no color. Just a clean, sharp military design. "A souvenir?" he asked, holding it up. "A memento," Isolde replied. "Of what?" "Of people who are no longer here." Rustin scoffed and tossed the box back on the table. The pin slipped out, clinking against the steel surface. For the first time, Isolde reacted. Her eyes followed it sharply. "Please," she said, barely above a whisper. "Be careful with that." "Oh? Is it worth something?" Rustin said mockingly. "Should we call an appraiser?" "Not in money," she said. Her voice had weight, the kind that silences a room if anyone's listening. Only one compartment remained. Rustin grabbed the zipper dramatically, playing to the audience. "Let's see what other ancient treasures we're hiding in here." By now, nearly 20 people had gathered, eyes fixed on the spectacle. That's when someone stepped forward. "Excuse me," a woman said, her tone firm. "Is this really necessary? You've already searched most of her things." Rustin snapped. "Security protocol, ma'am. Please step back." Isolde turned slightly, gave the woman a small nod, a quiet gesture of thanks. But her face remained still. Whatever lay inside that final pocket, she had already made peace with its exposure. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering the glass like distant drums. For a moment, Isolde's eyes drifted toward the windows, as if hearing something no one else could. Memories. Echoes. "Running an ID now," Loretz muttered into his radio, still suspicious. He tapped in her information with visible frustration. Rustin continued rummaging and pulled out a small address book. "Visiting friends while you're in town?" he asked. "Some of these are international addresses." "Most of those people are dead," Isolde said, her voice lower now. Not broken, just honest. Something in the way she said it made even Rustin pause, only for a heartbeat. The radio crackled. "ID verification inconclusive. File restricted. Subject listed as Isolde M., possible former government employee." Rustin's demeanor shifted. "Government employee? What department?" "I'm retired," she answered. "Retired from what exactly?" Loretz pressed. "That's classified." The words came out automatic, rehearsed, like she'd said them 1,000 times before. Rustin laughed. Classified, sure. And I'm the president. The crowd had turned restless now. Some whispered about how she was being treated. Others recorded openly. They could sense the story blooming. Something viral. Something wrong. The officers fed off the attention. They stood straighter, spoke louder. "This is taking too long," someone grumbled from the back of the line. "Some of us have real appointments." "Security cannot be rushed," Loretz barked. Isolde said nothing. She watched as her life was unpacked, poked and dismissed in front of strangers. But when Rustin finally reached forward with a wrapped photograph and began unpeeling the protective layers, she spoke. "Please," she said louder now, "be careful with that." Her tone had changed. It was no longer quiet. "That's irreplaceable," Rustin smirked. "Everything's irreplaceable to someone." Rustin set the wrapped photo down, this time with just a little more care. A corner of the paper had loosened, and from where she stood, Isolde could see part of the image. A group of figures in uniform, standing before a military helicopter. Her eyes lingered there, for just a moment, before she looked away, expression unreadable. "Nothing suspicious so far," Loretz muttered reluctantly. "People who hide things best," Rustin replied, still clinging to authority. "Know to hide them in plain sight." He reached for the final zipper, the one compartment Isolde had tried, gently but firmly, to protect from public view. Just as his hand gripped the zipper, the atmosphere in the atrium subtly shifted. From a side door, a tall, elderly man entered, dressed sharply in formal military attire, flanked by two younger officers. His medals were polished, his posture straight. He passed through another checkpoint, unnoticed by most, except Isolde. She saw him. Her expression, however, gave away nothing. Her eyes returned to Rustin's hand. "Last chance," he said smugly. "Anything you want to confess before we see what you're hiding?" "I'm not hiding anything," she said, calm as ever. "I just believe privacy is still a right." "In security matters, privacy is a luxury," Loretz replied, quoting some handbook as if it gave weight to their actions. The zipper's teeth parted slowly, each sound echoing under the harsh fluorescence of the lobby. The crowd leaned in as though drawn by instinct, unable to look away. Rustin reached in and pulled out a piece of folded fabric, thick, neatly pressed, and a deep, dignified blue. He gave it a careless shake. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was a military uniform jacket, preserved with near-sacred precision. "Well, well," Rustin said, eyes narrowing. "What do we have here?" He turned it in his hands, looking for something to mock, but his expression faltered slightly. Even to his untrained eye, something about the decorations and insignia didn't add up. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made no sense at all. Loretz stepped in, leaning closer. "These markings," he said slowly, "some of these I've never seen before." To the casual observer, the patches and medals might have seemed mismatched or strange, but anyone with true military knowledge would recognize how rare and significant this combination was. "This some kind of costume?" Rustin asked, his voice less sure now. Isolde's eyes hadn't moved. She stared at the jacket, now dangling carelessly from Rustin's grip, and for the first time, her face cracked, just slightly. A hint of sadness flickered there, not shame, something closer to reverence, maybe even pride. "That's not a costume," she said softly. "Then what is it?" Loretz pressed. "These insignia don't make sense together." "They would," she said, "if you had the proper clearance." Rustin scoffed. "Oh, right. Secret agent grandma. Here we go." He held the jacket up like a prize at an auction. "Look at this, folks. Apparently, we've got a Cold War spy on our hands." Nervous laughter bubbled from the crowd, but not everyone was laughing now. A few phones lowered. Some eyes shifted, unsure. The tone was changing. "There are medals," someone whispered, a woman near the front. "Those aren't costume pieces." Indeed, several glinted under the light. Not the kind found in stores or on parade floats. These were rare, specialized, the kind awarded for missions no newspaper ever reported. Probably surplus junk, Rustin muttered, though the confidence had faded from his voice. He turned back to her. "Where'd you get this?" "It was issued to me." Loretz examined the jacket more closely. "There's a name patch," he noted, pointing to a faded area near the breast. Rustin squinted. "Thorne," he read aloud, then looked up. "Isolde M. Thorne. So it's yours," he said, "or you had it custom made." "Check the service number," Isolde said, her voice still gentle, but now with an unmistakable edge of steel. "It should match the ID you've been holding." Loretz moved quickly, comparing the uniform's serial to the yellowed ID card. They matched. Rustin's face began to shift, confused, then uneasy. Then a voice spoke from the crowd. An older man had stepped forward. His eyes were sharp. "Those aren't regular issue," he said, pointing at one of the patches. "That symbol, I've only ever seen it in photos, from Black Ops missions in the 70s. Rustin bristled. "Sir, step back and let us handle this." The man raised both hands in surrender, but the effect lingered. Doubt had now entered the air, and it was contagious. This wasn't a confused old woman with war memorabilia. This was something else. Loretz's tone softened. "Where did this uniform come from, ma'am?" Isolde's reply was simple. "I earned it." Rustin clenched his jaw, clearly not ready to admit what was becoming obvious to everyone else. "Women weren't allowed in combat roles back then," Rustin said smugly, as if he had caught her in a lie. "Officially," Isolde replied. The word hung in the air like a secret everyone suddenly realized they'd misunderstood. Several people exchanged glances. What's written in the rule books and what actually happened are rarely the same, especially in the shadowy corners of military history. "So, what are you saying?" Rustin pressed. "You were some kind of undercover soldier?" "I'm not saying anything," she answered, unmoved. "I'm here for my appointment." At the far end of the atrium, the tall military officer who had entered earlier was now finishing his ID check. His eyes briefly swept the scene, freezing when he spotted the uniform in Rustin's hands. His posture straightened. Loretz tapped rapidly on his tablet. "Searching public military records for an Isolde M. Thorne. Nothing's coming up." "You wouldn't find me there," Isolde said flatly. "How convenient," Rustin muttered. Just then, one of the medals on the jacket slipped loose and hit the floor with a sharp clink. Isolde flinched, the first visible sign of emotion she'd shown. Before either officer could react, she stepped forward, retrieved the medal gently, and held it in her palm for a long moment. "This was awarded after Dressenvale," she said quietly. "Only 3 of us received it. I'm the last one still living." Her tone silenced even Rustin. He took the medal from her, more careful this time, and reattached it without a word. "What was Dressenvale?" Loretz asked, his voice lower now, curiosity overcoming authority. "You read the name in my notebook," Isolde replied. "That's all I'm permitted to say." By now, the energy in the atrium had shifted. What had started as public humiliation was transforming into something else, something deeper. The air felt charged with mystery. The crowd leaned on. "Now, who was this woman?" "We need to verify this," Loretz said, mostly to Rustin. "If those decorations are real, and if there's a reason her file's restricted—" "She's making it up," Rustin interrupted, but his voice lacked its earlier bite. "Old folks do this sometimes. They build fantasies about their past." "My past required no such imagination," Isolde said evenly. "Quite the opposite." A young woman in the crowd had been typing furiously on her phone. "I just looked up the Dressenvale operation," she announced. "There's nothing, only a footnote in a Cold War declassified doc. It just says, see file D78, classified. That's it." All eyes turned to Isolde. Her expression didn't change. She had known there would be no record. That was the point. At that moment, the tall military officer stepped toward them. As he approached, the polished stars on his shoulders and the weight of his uniform became unmistakable. A general. The crowd instinctively parted to let him through. Rustin noticed and straightened unconsciously.
"Sir, this area is that Captain Thorne's uniform you're holding, officer?" The man interrupted, his voice calm but commanding. The entire checkpoint froze. Even those watching from afar sensed it. This was a shift in power. Rustin looked from the uniform in his hands to the man approaching. We were just performing a standard check, sir." The general stepped up to the table and looked at Isolde. His expression softened just slightly, something respectful flickering in his eyes. Then he stood tall and saluted. "Captain Thorne," he said. "It's been a long time." Isolde returned the salute with the grace of muscle memory. "General Crane," she said with a slight smile. 40 years, I believe." The crowd buzzed in hushed surprise. Rustin and Loretz paled. You know her?" Loretz asked, barely able to process it. "Know her?" General Crane raised an eyebrow. "Captain Isolde Thorne was one of the finest officers I ever had the honor of serving with, though I imagine that's only now becoming clear to your clearance level." Rustin now held the jacket like it was sacred. "We had no idea. Her file was locked." "It was only declassified last month," General Crane said, now addressing the room. "After decades, we can finally acknowledge what her unit accomplished, and that's why she's here today." He turned to Rustin and Loretz, the authority in his voice absolute. "Please return Captain Thorne's belongings, with the same care and respect they were packed in." Rustin nodded quickly, color drained from his face. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." He folded the uniform jacket neatly this time, his earlier smirk replaced by awkward reverence. "We were following procedure," he offered weakly. "Procedure," General Crane said, "should always include dignity. That's part of the oath, too." Loretz gathered the rest of Isolde's things, now moving car. Briefly, almost reverently. Phones continued to record, but now it wasn't humiliation they captured, it was vindication. The general turned to the crowd. "Captain Thorne is here to receive the Distinguished Service Cross," he announced, "an honor withheld for decades due to the classified nature of her service." A stunned murmur spread through the room. The Distinguished Service Cross, just one tier below the Medal of Honor, was awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. "The President himself will be presenting the medal," General Crane added, "along with recognition for the surviving members of her unit." Rustin placed the jacket gently in Isolde's hands. She took it without drama, without vengeance, only a quiet nod, her fingertips brushing the fabric like it was something old, familiar, and still sacred. The event took place in a grand hall atop the government building. The storm had passed, leaving sunlight streaming through the high windows, illuminating the space with soft golden light. Rows of chairs were filled with uniformed officers, government officials, and family members. At the front sat 5 aging veterans, the surviving members of Special Operations Group Delta. Isolde took her seat among them, exchanging quiet greetings with those she hadn't seen in decades. Their reunion was not loud or tearful, but deeply felt. Bonds forged in silence and danger needed no grand display. "Didn't think we'd live to see this day," said the white-haired man beside her. His nameplate read, Commander Malcolm Reed. "Some of us didn't," Isolde answered quietly. "They're still with us," added Ela Foster, another survivor. "Finally being remembered, officially." A hush swept the room as the President of the United States entered, accompanied by senior military leaders. The ceremony began with dignified precision, honoring each surviving veteran individually. Then the announcer's voice rang out. "Captain Isolde M. Thorne, please step forward." She rose, straight-backed and steady, and walked to the stage in her formal uniform.
The President spoke briefly, but with conviction. Captain Thorne's actions during Operation Dressenvale saved the lives of 37 hostages. Her efforts prevented an international incident that could have changed the course of the Cold War. He paused. For decades, her courage was hidden by the nature of her missions. Today, we bring it into the light. Then, with solemn ceremony, he pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to her uniform, a decoration second only to the Medal of Honor. Isolde stood without fanfare, only a quiet nod as she accepted the medal. No tears, no grand speeches, only the recognition of a life lived in silence, and finally in trutis. Tea. The President's voice rang out clearly over the polished grandeur of the hall. Captain Thorne's linguistic brilliance and composure under extreme pressure embody the highest traditions of military service. As the Distinguished Service Cross was pinned to her chest, Isolde saluted. Her face remained composed, almost unreadable. But for those who truly knew her, the subtle shift in her expression wasn't pride. It was remembrance, a quiet honoring of the ones who had never made it home. The reception. In the adjacent reception hall, dignitaries mingled with decorated veterans and curious officials. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and whispers filled the air. People eager to hear stories once locked away in classified files. Isolde stood apart from the crowd, her hands gently cupping a glass of water. She watched with the quiet patience of someone who had seen much more than she would ever say. General Crane joined her. "How does it feel, after all these years?" he asked. She paused. "Strange," she admitted, "to speak openly about things we were trained never to acknowledge, to be thanked for actions we were told had never happened." "Times change," Crane said. "Do they?" Isolde replied, her voice even. "Or is it simply that those who wanted silence are no longer alive to enforce it?" Before he could answer, a familiar voice approached, nervous, respectful. "Captain Thorne," said Officer Adira Ellis, standing a little too stiffly in her dress uniform. "I hope I'm not intruding. I was invited by General Crane." "You're not intruding," Isolde said, offering a slight nod. "I wanted to properly apologize," Adira continued, "for what happened earlier, for how you were treated." "You weren't responsible." "No, but I also didn't speak up. I watched it happen and said nothing." She hesitated. "I've been thinking about what you said, about service happening where no one is watching." Isolde studied her. "Why did you choose to serve as a security officer?" Adira blinked, surprised. "To protect people? To serve? At least, that's what I believed. And now? Now, I'm not sure. Some days it feels like it's more about power than protection." Isolde nodded. "A common hazard, in any uniform." "How did you deal with the disrespect?" Adira asked, voice low. "Especially as a woman back then?" "With dignity," Isolde answered. "Not because I always felt dignified, but because keeping your dignity deprives others of the power to take it." She let the words settle, then added, "People will always judge what they can see. Your job, Officer Ellis, is to know what's invisible, your own worth." Adira absorbed the words. "Thank you for your service, for your wisdom." As she walked away, General Crane turned back to Isolde. "You made quite an impression." "Perhaps," she said, "but I think she already knew those things. Sometimes we just need permission to believe what we already understand." Around them, the reception buzzed on. Laughter and conversation, clinking glasses, light falling through tall windows like a benediction. "Will you tell them?" Crane asked. "The full story of Dressenville?" Isolde looked out at the gathering. Officials, veterans, journalists hungry for drama, young soldiers hungry for heroes. She thought of Teeth, a checkpoint, of the duffel bag laid bare.
of memory turned spectacle. "No," she said at last. "Some things belong only to those who lived them. Recognition is one thing. Exhibition is another." Crane nodded slowly. "Always the most private of heroes." "Not a hero," she said. "Just a soldier who did what was necessary." A quiet ending. As the reception wound down, Isolde gathered her belongings, now including the Distinguished Service Cross, nestled beside the worn uniform that had revealed her identity. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets were wet, the sky clearing. A fresh stillness hung in the air. Waiting near the exit, now out of uniform, stood Adira Ellis. "Captain Thorne," she said, approaching gently. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but would you mind if I walked with you a bit? I have more questions about service, about finding meaning." Isolde looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They walked away from the government building together. Isolde did not speak of operations, medals, or classified missions. She spoke of deeper truths, about duty, about respect, about the quiet courage required to remain standing in a world eager to push you down. Behind them, the building stood gleaming in the gold of late afternoon, its security lines still moving, still searching bags, still deciding who was worth a second glance. Unaware they had once tried to reduce a legend to just another inconvenience in line.